Hey, this is Kevin with AGL, and thanks for checking back in with us. It's been a little while since we've been in the studio, and we've done some videos for you guys, and we wanted to get back into that. We're going to do that with a 5-part series going over some of our roots, getting back into scratch building, and doing some price point comparisons between parts at the hobby shop and parts ordered online. In that same series, we're also going to do some simple 4-channel programming on our Spektrum radio with the new protocol that's in the DX6, 7, and 9s. I believe it's also in the 18s, and also our 14SG over here for Futaba users. During this video, this initial one, we're going to go to the hobby shop, we're going to buy the parts we need to build one scratch built plane, and then we're going to order the exact same parts, at least in their power comparison, overseas so we can build the other airplane. We're going to build these airplanes out of the Dollar Tree foam board that I know the flight test guys use a lot, and instead of the more expensive Depron or the fanfold foam that you can get from Lowe's. Doing these scratch built planes it's pretty simple stuff. We're going to do these with hot glue guns, so they won't be the lightest airships, but it'll be a great way to get into the hobby. This is really simple build techniques that we're going to show you, stuff I've learned over the years from watching some of the flight test guys, from earlier than that from Ed at Experimental Airlines, RC Superpowers if you've seen his show, and several other guys that I've downloaded some plane plans from on RC groups. There's a lot of different plans that you can get for free on RC groups, and as we progress through this video, in the description you'll be able to see our price point comparisons between the stuff we bought from the hobby shop and overseas, and also you'll be able to download these plans and build these planes for you. So we're going to get started. We're going to go to the hobby shop and buy our first set of parts so we can build a high wing trainer, which will be really easy for guys getting into the hobby, and we'll program it with the Spektrum, and then we'll order our parts from overseas. We'll show you the price comparison, and we'll build the mid-wing 3D plane. This is an Edge 540, it's 45-inch wingspan, and program it on the Futaba. And then once we get all the planes built, we'll go out to the airfield and do some maidens, show you how to trim them out and get them flying right, and go over the CG points and things like that. So hang tight and we'll be right back. So we're here at Mountain Hobbies, our local hobby shop, to pick up some of the parts that we're going to need for this initial build on the airplane. This is going to be for the high wing trainer. They've got our push rods. They've got most of the components we're going to need on the shelves back here. We've got our control horns, so we can install these to help control all the control surfaces on the airplane. For our scratch build, prop savers are great, so when we come into land our prop will bend out of the way instead of breaking. And since we're spinning a low kV motor, we'll go with a 947 slow fly APC prop. And we'll go back up front. Most of the power package stuff, the batteries, receivers, motors, ESCs, all that stuff's up front. But we're going to be able to get most of it from these shelves back here. Okay guys, we're back from the hobby shop, Mountain Hobbies, where we bought all of our power package, servos, all that kind of good stuff to complete this build. We already had the plans printed out, so we cut those out real quick and put the pieces together so we can transpose these onto our foam, which we had already purchased from Dollar Tree. We just went to Dollar Tree and bought 10 sheets of foam. It's all they had, for 10 bucks, so we can build several airplanes out of them. And for this particular plane, I think we're going to need about 2 sheets to complete it. So what we're going to do, we've got all of our little pieces here, which is going to be a really neat high wing trainer. It's going to be a full fuselage high wing trainer as opposed to just a profile plane. So it'll have a little style to it. It'll give us the opportunity to expand a little bit on some of our scratch building skills. Okay, so we have all of our parts over here, and we have our reference sheet. We have our 2 pieces of foam. One thing to note for this bulkhead piece here, this calls for the 1-inch foam, either pink or blue depending on if you get it from Home Depot or Lowe's, and we don't have that. We're going to use this Dollar Tree foam. So to get to this
1-inch thickness, we are actually going to cut out 5 of these and glue them all together so we get that size bulkhead. On the front of this bulkhead here, you can see we left in this notch. This is for your motor mount, so you can either do the stick motor mount, or we are actually going to leave that there and put just a flush firewall and screw our motor into that. We did cut out this notch for the landing gear, but we decided to make this just a straight up belly lander to keep it nice and light and simple. So we're just going to bypass that part there when we go to draw out the pieces. So for the next part, we're going to lay out all these pieces, transfer the pattern onto the foam, and get all the pieces cut out. So we'll speed this part of the video up to help it progress along. Okay, so we traced out all of the plans under our foam here. You can see where we traced out several copies of the center bulkhead so that we can put those all together to get our 1-inch thickness of that. On our rudder and elevator, you can see we scribed the line for the bend point, and we'll show you as we get these cut out how we're actually going to cut halfway through the foam and make nice little 45-degree beveled hinges in there on the foam. This particular plane is set to be a high wing trainer, so it doesn't have functioning ailerons. We want those, so we're going to just change the plan slightly to give us functioning ailerons. How we're going to do that is measure 1 inch from the trailing edge of our wing, mark our spot, and then 1/2 inch on the other side. And then we'll just put a line across, and we'll have a point to make our aileron. And then we'll get these guys cut out. Now while we're getting ready to cut these out, we're going to make sure to save these plans in case we tear up this airplane so we can rebuild it if we need, because the electronics should be good even if we have a catastrophic failure in flight and find the ground. We can always make another one, and it's only going to cost us another $1 or $2 because the foam is so cheap. So we've taken our trusty glue gun and we're going to plug it in so it can be warming up while we cut out all these pieces. Okay, so we got all of our pieces cut out of the foam. We had a little technical difficulty with the camera, but we're back up and rolling. We'll cut out all of our little pieces right here of our center bulkhead, and when you stack them all up, make sure you got them all. You can put them against your fuse. You can see how they're going to fit in at the front, and put the other piece of the fuse on there, and you can see how we're going to end up with this flat spot up front so we can put our firewall for the motor. We'll have a void here. The wing is going to have a nice camber across the top of the fuse. We have an opening down here for our battery, and then we'll attach the rear bulkhead here, and our bottom piece has a taper, so we can put it on one side and then press the other one together and glue them together, so we'll have that nice tapered in down here. One thing we did notice after we assembled our motor for this aircraft, the motor is a little bit larger, a little wider than I had expected, so we cut off the end pieces right here at the front of our fuselage piece to match our bulkhead piece, so we can have just enough relief for this motor to go up front. And I had Brandon cut out a little block of wood for me that we can use for our firewall. So, yeah, there's Brandon's thumb. So when we get ready to put this guy together, then we can glue this block of wood up front, and we'll be able to bolt the motor straight to that. So what we're going to start out with first is the wing. This wing does not have a spar, so we're going to do a couple things. Since we're having functioning ailerons, we're going to glue this wing together in the center, and then we are going to score out a couple lines 1/4 inch apart near the front of this wing right here, so that we'll have a nice bend and we won't have crease areas. And then we're going to take some of this fiber reinforced tape from 3M. This stuff is great, and since this wing will not have a spar, to take away the flex in it, we're going to put, once we get the wing assembled, we're going to put a very taut piece across the top, flip it over, and put a very taut piece across the bottom, and that'll give us a push-pull effect. So if the wing starts to flex, the bottom piece of tape will hold it down and in place. So let's get started. We have our trusty glue gun here. We've turned up the heat a little bit to get it all the way, and we're going to start by putting just a little bead of glue along this center line on the wing. We're going to press these two pieces together. So you'll notice on this wing, the leading edge is very straight, so that'll help with the stall characteristics. We round at the corners, and then we have a taper back here on the trailing edge. We marked out our spot for our ailerons, and to determine our relief for our full-size fuselage, instead of being a profile fuse, we're having a 3D fuse. We needed to measure this gap so that we have some relief for our ailerons, which ends up being about 2.5 millimeters, so that we clear that fuse really well. We marked that out on either side at 2.5 mil, and what we're going to do is just go ahead and cut our relief for the aileron. That way we'll be able to bend it. This is actually the bottom of the wing here. So once we're sure that the glue is good and stuck, and it seems to be, every once in a while you'll glue one to the table, and you just have to work it a little bit to get it loose. So before we get into all the bends and stuff, we're going to go ahead and cut the relief along this line for the aileron so that we can bend it. And all we're going to do is, this is the bottom, okay, this is going to be the top. So what we want to do on the bottom side of the wing is cut along this line, but not to make sure not to cut all the way through the foam, so that we can bend this over, and then we'll cut a bevel in it so that this guy will be able to rotate back and forth. And it's always good to use a nice new razor when dealing with this stuff. Make sure to change them out often. They're fairly cheap, and if you keep a good razor, it'll be a lot easier to cut through this stuff. One other thing that you'll notice is that this foam is of course covered with paper, and sometimes the paper will bunch up a little bit, and you just have to take your time, clean out the paper, pull the bunched up foam out of the way, and just keep working your way down. I know this goes without saying, but just be careful when you're using these razors. They are really sharp, and we're doing all these cuts towards us and towards our fingers all the time. We don't want to end up getting blood all over our nice clean white hair plane here. We'd rather color it in some other manner with our colored tape or something like that. That is, unless you're building a Bloody Wonder, and then it's okay to get a little blood on the Bloody Wonder. So now we have an aileron that'll bend both ways, and that will be plenty of aileron for this plane, I assure you. So we'll do the same thing on the other side and speed this part up. Okay, there we go with hinge number 2. One thing you can do to kind of touch up some of this right here is just to take a little scrap piece of sandpaper, and you can hit these edges. This foam does sand pretty well. Once you get the paper out of the way, you can just take your sandpaper, fold it over, and get both sides of that bevel. Okay, so we have the top of our wing and the bottom. Now to create a little relief so that we get a good bend here on our fuse, we don't get creasing, we're going to make a couple little slots. All we're going to do is take our ruler and Brandon, hand me that straight edge over there, it's a little longer. And we're going to take the back side of our knife or a pin, and we're just going to crease this. Just once or twice, all the way down. That way the foam, as we stretch it across that fuselage, will be able to bend just a little bit easier. And these are about a 1/2 inch apart. Now, you can grab these and you can feel that the foam can move and bend a little easier for you. So to reinforce the wing, of course we need to reinforce the seam because that little bit of hot glue is not going to hold that. So we're going to take our trusty tape here. This is great stuff for doing little projects like this. And we're going to put a piece of tape just all the way around it. Alright, we still have good relief for our ailerons. The tape is almost exactly the same width as ailerons. If not, then we can just cut out a little bit more on whichever side we need so that they will bend without any binding. There we go. Now we're going to put a piece of tape across this area on the bottom of our wing. And this is going to work much like a spar would. You have to make sure though to keep the tape really taut as you go across the wing. And we'll flip it over and do the same thing for the top. Okay, Okay, that should give us the structural stability that we need in this wing. So, now we can move on to assembling the fuse. So we need to get all these pieces put together and glued so we can start to put this fuse, we can get this bulkhead installed on one of the sides of the fuselage. So all we're going to do is glue these guys together and we'll speed this part up. Okay, so we have our bulkhead built, and one thing to note before you get started is make sure you have plenty of glue sticks sitting out, but do yourself a favor when you're building these airplanes. Grab 2 glue sticks and hold them, and think about that kind of weight. That's the possible weight that you're carrying around this aircraft. If it takes you both of those glue sticks to finish it, then that's the extra weight that you're putting on this foam to assemble this guy. So think about that when you're going. It's good to be literal with your glue to make sure that you're holding everything in place the way it needs to be, but think about the extra weight of all that hot glue on board the aircraft. One other thing, if you notice when I was putting this together, I'm sitting here, I'm rubbing this on the table and making sure to squeeze it really well. And as some of this glue comes out of these seams, we need to keep this edge, so you can take a scrap piece of foam or something like your table to kind of smooth it out and get all the excess glue that comes out when you start to squeeze these pieces together. So we're going to take the bulkhead and we're going to put it on the inside part of our fuse here. I'm actually going to take a pen and mark this out so I can put the glue on the fuselage side instead of on the bulkhead. Make it a little easier to maneuver with the glue gun that way. There, starting to look a little bit like an airplane. Okay, instead of just going ahead and putting this other side of the fuse on, we're going to set this to the side, and we're going to take our rear bulkhead piece that we cut out, and we're going to place this in here after we put on we have the 2 long pieces that taper. We have one for the bottom and one for the top. The top piece is going to go along through here and bend, and then down the side. And the bottom piece is going to do the same thing. We actually have a notch right here where it's going to fit in, and then just go along the bottom. We'll put this bottom piece on first, and then we'll put the top piece on. And this is going to help to give you that taper effect on the tail. It gives this plane a nice scale appearance, and I've built it before, I've flown it before. It's a nice high wing trainer type plane. You can take to the park, it flies nice and slow, and it's just a breeze to build and fly. And then we'll do the same thing for the top piece. Now do note that the top piece is going to start right here at the back of the wing. One really nice thing about using the hot glue, other than the weight, is that once you put it on there, it's going to stay. It rarely comes loose, and it's really quick and easy to work with. If you have a little extra, you can usually pull it off, peel it off. You can cut it with a razor, and it's just nice to be able to do a fairly quick assembly. You can build these guys in just a couple of hours, from nothing to having your plans cut out and be assembling the aircraft, and hopefully be flying later that day or the next afternoon. So we have this whole side of the fuse built now. And we're starting to feel a little bit of weight to it. So we're going to take this bulkhead piece, we're going to install it right back here. This is going to give us a little more strength on the back side of the wing. Okay, before we put the other side of the fuse on, we want to determine where our electronics are going to sit. To determine where we're going to put our servos, we're going to cut a hole in the fuse and insert the servo so we can run the wire up here. We can have our receiver sitting up here or right back here. To determine all that, and these will reach all the way up here so we can have the receiver as far forward as possible. To determine where we want to put these servos, we're actually going to temporarily install our elevator. First, we need to set this guy up just like we did with the other one, so we can have this rear part of the elevator be able to move with the servo and give us lift. So, we're going to take and do another half cut through the foam. Okay, so we have our bevel going through. You see there's one or two little spots where we may have cut a little too deeply and the paper started to break. Really simple fix there. We're just going to take our trusty tape and we're going to use the slightly cheaper tape for this and just go back over that edge. Alright, so we have this completed. You take your half of the fuse that you've assembled, you can see how it's going to key in just like that, and it's going to taper back to a point right at the pivot end on that elevator. So we need to take a control horn, one of the ones that we bought from the hobby shop, and install it on here. And of course you can see the center line straight through here. If you have a little hard time figuring out exactly what it is, you can see the point there and the point back here. So you can take your ruler and line those up and just offset it by about 1 inch. Now you need to make sure to do this on the bottom side. The one other thing to note is that where the holes are, you want that to be at the center of the bend to get the most deflection possible. Now, how is this going to help us determine where the servo goes? Well, we have this assembled now. You slide it back into our fuse and take the other half, slide it on. It's going to fit just like that. And if you bought some push rods from the hobby shop, these we already had. They were cut to this particular length. So we are going to put the servo where we need it to accommodate the length of these push rods. If you had longer ones, then you can put the servo a little farther forward probably than what we're going to do to help with your center of gravity, and just cut these to suit your length. Since these have already been cut for us, we are going to take and just mock up where this is going to fit. And we're going to leave this servo loose until we're sure that it's sitting just the way we need. We'll do the same thing for the rudder. The rudder servo is going to be on the other side of the fuse that we've already assembled here. We're going to put a little piece of tape on the rudder just like we did with the elevator to help protect that hinge. Alright, now our rudder is ready to be installed. So we have another control horn. We're going to test fit our rudder. And the rudder on this aircraft is just going to sit on the back just like this. So we can take our control horn put it up just a couple inches so it will clear, and do just like with the other one and press it through. And determine where it's going to poke through into the tape, cut the relief, and then glue it in. Okay, so we have our control horn installed on our rotor. We had a pre-cut piece of linkage rod. So we're going to take our linkage rod and measure out where our servo needs to sit. Okay, so we have this servo sitting loose inside of our slot we just cut. And we have determined that we're going to put our receiver probably right here due to the length of our wiring, so that we don't have it pulled really taut. We have a little bit of flexibility, and we're going to cut a small relief into this bulkhead piece here so we can run our wiring. Just like so. Now we're ready to install the other half of the fuse. So it's going to sit just like this. It's always good to check and make sure that everything's going to seat the way you expect it to before we get to the point of glue. That all looks good. So we're going to put glue on this side because there's a lot of voids that we wouldn't know where to put glue on that side. So we're going to put glue on this side, through here, and along these seams, and press the two pieces together. So the main part of it's finished. What we're going to do now is the tail feathers, they install very easily, so we're going to set them to the side, and we're going to do a little work on this wing so that we can actually get in here and plug all this stuff in. What we're going to do after we get the wing installed is cut a little hatch over here in the side, and we'll cut it in a way that we can open it and get to it, and it still have that nice scale appearance because all the electronics will be hidden inside the fuselage. But to get to the wing, now as you can see we have this curve, so we're going to work the wing a little bit to see if we can get it to fit on there just right, and then once we're happy with the fit of the wing, then we're actually going to glue this one in. The plan is you'll see little circles on the fuse so that you can install like barbecue skewers in there and have the wing be detachable. You put the barbecue skewers through and run rubber bands back and forth over the wing so you can take it off. But this is a pretty small bird, so I feel perfectly confident in doing a permanent attachment of this wing. And this thing's small enough we can just throw it in the trunk of the car and keep it in the back seat of the truck without any issue. So you can see how this wing's going to fit. I'm going to work this curve down the entire leading edge. You can see my tape's a little off, that'll throw you off visually. But and that's one of the things we were talking about. We don't have to be perfect with this guy for it to fly just right. So what we're going to do is put a little glue along through here because we're going to do a permanent attachment of this wing. And then we should be good to go. Hopefully the wing loading on this plane is going to be light enough that we shouldn't have any problem after we, with this wing, not having a spar in it. Especially since we put the tape in there, it should be good to go. I built it before out of the fan fold foam, which is a little more flimsy than this stuff. This stuff has the paper, which gives it some more reinforcement, and it has a similar property to what we did with the tape. You kind of get a push-pull effect against the foam, and hopefully this guy won't fly as well as I'm talking it up. Otherwise, then we'll just pick another set of plans. Alright, We're going to line it up, of course, and we have the center line here, and you can see the center of the fuselage. If you end up a little bit off, then just move it over. Try not to get burned by the glue. It's really hot glue. It's hot glue, if that makes sense. And then as you work your way down to the back, making sure to hold it very firmly, you can look at your center line and you can line it up with an imaginary line down through to your tail. That way you don't end up with a point of the wing, one of these outer edges, ahead of the other one. Otherwise the plane will fly in a crab fashion, and one wingtip will end up stalling before the other one, and you'll end up with a tip stall. And once we feel that this glue has dried enough, you can see that we have a little bit of gap on the front. We're going to take and put a little more glue in there. Again, hot glue is good for filling these gaps, and it's strong, but we don't want to put two whole sticks inside this aircraft. It's going to make it a lot heavier than it really needs to be. Okay, so we look good on the leading edge. You go back to the trailing edge, we've got a little bit of a gap, and we're going to leave that. So we have a little bit of airflow through the fuse. And I'm going to flip it over and put a little more glue along these seams here, just to give us a little bit more insurance. On both sides. Okay, so we took some extra glue and put along this seam on either side of the wing to help reinforce it a little bit. And once it's good and dry, you can start to work the outer edges of this curvature of the wing. Make sure that it's equal the whole way out and doesn't get flat out here at the end. So when we get over here to the stabilizer, we're going to test fit it, and then what's a good idea is to take your pen and outline it. Now you have a point at the top of the elevator and a point at the back, and just make sure to get the point as centered inside the tail of this guy as best you can, and look at it to make sure that it's visually straight. Now we had talked about parts of this airplane can be off just a little bit and the airplane will still fly well. Now one thing that I noticed once I got the tail assembled is that one side curves in a little more than the other. So that can visually throw you off a little bit, but just get this elevator as straight as you can so it won't try to yaw to one side or the other, and you won't have a rolling action as you activate the elevator while you're flying. And then we're going to mark it with our pen. That way it'll be a lot easier for us to take this guy, put the glue right here, and slide it in. And if we feel the need, then we can put a little extra glue along those sides like we did with the bottom of the wing. But there's not near as much stress on this elevator, so I think it'll be fine. And it's held on the bottom and the top, as opposed to the wings just held on the bottom. And once we get this guy on here really well, then we can go ahead and install our rudder. And the rudder's going to fit on like so, and there again, we want to make sure that it's as straight as possible with the front of the aircraft so we don't get unnecessary yaw action. Good. Now you can kind of hold it up a little bit and examine your work, make sure everything looks straight, and this one looks almost dead on, so that ought to be good. Okay, so next we're going to move to installing our firewall, and then we'll cut out the hatch for our electronics bay. So we have a little firewall. We took our motor and we put the little X mount on the back, and then we marked on the wood where our screw points are going to be. And I like to, so we don't end up splitting the wood, take your razor and just kind of start a hole a little bit so that when you go to put that screw in there later, you don't split the wood so easy. And another neat little trick is if you take just a little bit of CA and put on those screws when you put them in, then they shouldn't ever back out. We're going to test fit this guy, and we can see that we have a little bit of unevenness with our foam. We're going to take our razor and straighten that up a little bit. So for this is our firewall, so we want to make sure to use liberal amounts of glue for this part. Now once that guy gets good and dry, it should hopefully never come off. And we're going to use a prop saver on our motor instead of this collet adapter. So as we come in to land, if the prop strikes, then it should just bend the prop over to one side or the other, as opposed to trying to break off our firewall or break the prop. We're going to hold off installing that until that's good and set. But while we're waiting for that glue to dry, we're going to go ahead and cut our hatch for the access to the electronics for the wires that we ran on these servos. So we can see our battery hatch, and then of course this is the width of our bulkhead, and it's all hollow through here, and our secondary bulkhead lines up with the back of the wing. So we know this area is good to go. So what we're going to do, we'll take and we'll use our straight edge. We want to make sure that we make this big enough that we can work inside there. Now, we want to do this kind of like we did the hinges for our ailerons and etc. So we're going to cut all the way through on these parts. Make sure when you're cutting through that you're just barely going through the paper, so you don't accidentally nick some of those servo wires that you ran into the fuse earlier. Now we have our door. And it's going to open forward, so in forward flight it'll just stay shut. And we can just put a little piece of tape across there to hold it that way. So we can pull our servo wires out. And next, we'll get this third servo installed for our ailerons. Right now for this pesky aileron servo, we're going with a single aileron servo. Like I said before, these plans do not even call for ailerons, but we want to have ailerons to be functional on this aircraft. So we're going to use a single aileron setup. It's actually easier to have two independent ailerons, so they'll work just like our tail feathers back here. But with a single aileron, we're going to set this up here. We're going to have a rod going to each side so that we have push and pull just like normal ailerons would function. We've marked out where this guy is going to sit. We need to cut this out and then put it in there. Now we're going to use our push rods to test fit where our control horns need to be mounted. We're going to mount these on the top of the wing. We could do it underneath the wing, but it's just a lot easier to leave these on top. If we put it under the wing, it'd look a little more scale. It'd keep the top of the airplane looking a little bit neater. But we're going for function. Now one thing to note is since we were putting the control horns on the top of the wing, you can see the bend, but it's not quite as noticeable. You still want to make sure to have the holes of your control horn lined up as close as you can to that bend so you get the most deflection. And we have those set where they're going to be, so we're going to pull those out and put just a little drop of glue on there and set them back. Alright, we're almost getting to the point where we're actually going to plug in the receiver and put a little power to this. So before we do that, since we didn't center up the servos, we're going to remove the control horns, so that when we get ready to power up this aircraft for the first time, we don't have any binding issues. So we're going to be careful not to lose these teeny little screws and remove the control horn. And we're actually going to wait until we power up the aircraft and get it set the way we like before we put a little hot glue on these servos to hold them in their place. And we're going to be using a Spektrum radio control system for this aircraft, and for the Profile 540 Edge that Brandon is going to be building, we're actually going to use a Futaba so that we can do a radio programming video for both a 4-channel setup and for the Spektrum 4-channel setup.
Futaba.
And for the Futaba, if you're not familiar, all of our local Yanks around here say Futaba instead of Futaba, but it's kind of a running joke around West Shelby RC field. Alright, so we have our servos installed. They're sitting here loose. We have all of our control horns in. We have cut our hatch for our receiver, and we have our 3 cables pulled out. So we're actually going to break out our receiver. We picked this one out with the rest of the components for this build from Oak Mountain, and this is actually a good price for a Spektrum receiver. It's just $30 for this little 4-channel guy. I'm going to go ahead and stick my bind plug in here, because the first thing I'm going to do is bind it to the radio. And it's pretty easy to tell which servo goes to what. The servos we're using, we also got from Oak Mountain for this build, are the Hitec HS-55s. These are the plastic gear servos, 9-gram servos. They are perfectly fine. If you want, just for durability and long-lasting appeal, you can go with some metal gear servos, and we're going to do that in the extra, the 540 Edge, not an extra, but a 540 Edge, because we expect it to hit the ground a little bit as we're starting to progress in our flight, move away from the high wing trainer into a more 3D plane. Okay, so we installed our motor, put our 4 screws in. We have this collet adapter still on here. We're actually not going to fly with this, but we left it on just to make sure we have good clearance with where our prop is going to sit and the front of the plane. If we needed to, then we just trim a little bit of that off. We installed the wires for the speed control just so we can gauge our length and where we're going to set it. We see our battery hatch right here, so we're going to take the lead, and we're going to cut a small hole here so we can actually run this lead in there and keep it all tucked in, and then we'll put a little piece of Velcro in there so when we put the battery in, it'll stay. We can Velcro the battery there. We'll glue the ESC on the outside, and the reason we're going to leave the ESC outside the fuse when most everything else is hidden is so we have good constant airflow over this heat sink to keep it nice and cool. We'll take and poke a small hole for our speed control lead to go through to our receiver and our hidden hatch on the other side. So we'll just mark us a spot right here. We'll cut a hole just big enough to fit that connector through. Make sure that we can get it through, and then we'll take our hot glue for the last time, hopefully, and put it on our speed control here. Now remember that our little secret compartment is just behind this bulkhead, and then it's between the bulkhead, which can run up through here, and the trailing edge of the wing where the secondary bulkhead is. So we're going to do the same thing. Make sure the ESC's on there good, and just make the smallest hole that we can get away with. Just to get this servo lead through for the speed control. There we go. Pull it out on the other side and plug it into our throttle channel. And we're set. And that's our little high wing trainer, fellas. I hope you check us out for our next video. We're actually going to power up the aircraft, do the 4-channel program on our brand new Spektrum DX6, and we'll show you how to set up Expo and all that kind of stuff. And we'll get this guy powered up and everything trimmed out and ready for our maiden flight. This is Kevin with AGL, and thanks for watching.
And action. Also, we thought about doing a simple 5 ports. I know it's been a little while since we've done a video, but